Dave Turk,
Present.
Bob Frank,
Present.
Todd Coppernow, Aaron Umbehown,
Present.
John Murphy Lopez,
Here.
Harry Severson.
Present.
I'm here too.
Oh, sorry, I forgot you last time too, didn't I? No, you were gone last time. Steve Carroll.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got enough. We've got a quorum, so we can conduct our meeting. So I'll go ahead and call this.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here as a guest.
Yeah, hi Don. Glad you're here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and call this August 8th meeting of the Referendum Ad Hoc Committee to order. So agenda item number 2, proof of notification. Ms. Dole, did you put that down in the courthouse lobby?
Yes, I posted it downstairs.
Okay, thanks for doing that. So agenda item number 3, we got a 14-point agenda, so I'm looking for a motion to approve.
This is Bob. I'll move.
Okay, motion by Frank.
Second
by Severson. All those in favor of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, we've got an agenda. Agenda item number 4, public comments. Anyone from the public who wants to make comments to the committee? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 5, approval of minutes from our, I believe it was July 20-something meeting. I can't quite remember the date, so I'm looking for a motion to approve those.
I'll make the motion. This is Dave.
Okay, motion by Turk. Camera's on you, Aaron. You want to make the second? Okay, thanks. Second by, and then, how do you say your last name again?
Yeah.
Oh, keep your mic on.
It takes like 2 seconds. I'll try.
Unbehan.
Unbehan.
Get it?
However you want to say it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, all those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, so we have approved minutes. Okay, so we've got probably 7 more substantial agenda items today. So I put these together last Friday. And I think how I would describe it is the first 5 are kind of informational. So we're looking for questions and feedback on all this information that's been gathered. And then the last 2, we've got some action for the committee to take today, if we choose to do that. So I'll just jump right into number 6, and feel free, especially since I'm not in the room, just interrupt me by speaking over me if I start going and you need to stop me for something. So agenda item number 6 is statutory authority to hold a referendum. So at our last meeting, we didn't get into the statutes, but we did talk about some of the legal aspects of an operating referendum. So there's 3 main statutes. There are additional statutes that talk about how to hold a referendum in an election. But these are the ones that specifically get at how can a county do an operating levy referendum. So the first one is 59.605. That's the one that says we have to give the clerk 70 days notice, the county board does, when we want to do an operating referendum through a resolution. But the levy limits that are in that statute, they oddly enough sunsetted in 2011. And so the levy limits in that statute don't apply. So you have to go to General Municipality Law, Chapter 66, to actually find our statute. So thanks to Mr. Langreich for tracking this down and sending it to me. So this is the one that talks about levy limits, and then they apply to not only cities, villages, and towns, but also counties. So it says that we can't increase the levy limit beyond our valuation factor. and that valuation factor is in italics there. And that's the one where we've been talking about net new construction. So they define it fairly clearly in statute, but then they give us 7 exceptions. These things don't, in these cases, levy limits don't apply for property taxes. So you've got the 7 there: debt, the bridge and culvert repairs, libraries, emergencies, and then finally referendums. So I wanted to mention, last time we were talking about the idea of having to align with school board referendums. We've dug a little more deeply into the statute and clarified that what the statute says is that in odd numbered years, there are only 2 elections in Wisconsin. There's the spring primary in April, and then there's the what is it called? The spring primary and the spring election. So the spring primary is in February, the spring election is in April. There are no other elections that year. So state statute allows schools to call a special referendum if there's a natural disaster. And you can see that in attachment C under chapter 121 school finance. So all the statute is saying here about counties is you can hold an operating levy question if a school board has authorized a special referendum in an odd numbered year. Otherwise, you hold them on the regularly scheduled elections. Nothing saying that we have to hold it with a school referendum. It just gives us another opportunity to. That wasn't our understanding last time around, so that's why we've got the statute here today, just to clarify all that. So are there any questions or feedback on our statutory authority?
Yeah, Sean, Steve Carroll asking a question here.
Yeah.
So when will we know, or do we know, if there will be any school referendums?
We do not know that yet. We would know that 70 days before either the February or the April elections, because that's when they also, I believe, have to notify the clerks that they are going to hold a special referendum, or a referendum. Doesn't have to be a special referendum. Any referendum.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
with that explanation you just give us, we're not tied into those dates, that we could choose either February or April. We just can't put it on a special date, correct?
You're correct in that we can choose February or April. If we decided to wait, however, it sounds like we could also do it if a school district calls a special referendum. But keep in mind that that's very unlikely, because there would have to be a natural disaster. And then they would have to call a special referendum. So the likelihood of something happening outside of February and April is very low for next year.
So our dates in 2023 would be either February or April.
You got it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah. Go ahead, Don.
you mentioned that there have to be 75 days notice to the clerk before the election. So does that mean that, for example, if we really had everything together, we could give the clerk notice 75 days before this November election? Is that correct?
The days you got almost correct. It's 70, not 75. And yes, it's 70 days before any election. However, the likelihood of us being ready in November is extremely low, because we don't know some of the basic, we don't know the answers to some of the basic questions. For example, why we're doing the referendum, how much, how many years, things like that.
The other element, Mr. Chair, would be that the question is to raise the levy limit in the following year. So if we did it in November, we'd be looking to impact 2023.
Yeah, and by then our budget is set anyway, so yeah, we would not be looking at a November referendum. The likelihood of that is extremely low. Any other questions or feedback on all this statutory language?
Steve with another question.
Yeah.
the terminology always talks about operating, and I'm always trying to understand whether if we have some capital project that we wanted to do a referendum, is that a separate thing, or is that also assumed to be part of it just because you would use it for debt service, or is there a difference?
Well, we fund capital projects in a few ways, and two of those few ways are one through the operating levy, and another is through the debt levy. So the state of Wisconsin does not require us to go to the voters to increase the debt levy. That's one of those exceptions that was in Chapter 66. So if we choose to put some of the capital projects in the operating levy, we can, that can be part of the question that we ask voters. Most of the projects, however, capital projects that we fund come through our debt levy, but not all of them do. And then, of course, there's outside sources of funding too that fund our capital projects. A lot of ways to fund capital projects, but we do not have to go to the voters for debt levy. We can go to them ourselves. Now, we could ask them to do that if we want, but it's not required by state law. And we'll see that in some of the county examples we look at. Okay, any more questions on that one? All right, well, we'll move on to 7 then. And if you need to come back to those, just the statutory stuff, it's okay. We're just kind of got this laid out in this order. So agenda item number 7 is the Wisconsin referendum report. So this was thanks to Supervisor Carrie Severson, who mentioned this in our initial meeting. And there is a report that, what is it called? The Robert La Follette School of Public Affairs at UW-Madison. They published it. It's called Pushing the Limits, Factors Contributing to Passage of Municipal Levy Referenda. So the county, of course, isn't a municipality, but they studied counties as well because they wanted more examples to look at in that report. So I just put a few bullet points on the cover sheet here about different things that were mentioned in here. They looked at the years 06 to 2018, 7 counties passed referendums and 8 failed at having referendums. They gave the reasons for doing referendums, which are some of the things that we've been talking about. So it's kind of nice to see all that summarized, including declining state aid and restrictions on revenue options. They gave the history of levy limits since 05, which was also pretty interesting. It was probably one of the best descriptions I think I've read. Talked about the purpose of levy limits and their unintended consequences, like why did Wisconsin institute them back in 05, and what are some of the negative things that are happening because of it now. It describes the referendum process and then 3 case studies from 3 different cities around Wisconsin. And then it looks at the characteristics of over 100 referenda, including their purpose, the amount of time, the amount of increase to the levy, and then the length of time. So I had some of my misconceptions dispelled, I guess is how you would say it. When I read through these, there were things I was expecting that were not true in their analysis. And Carrie, I wonder if there's anything else you want to say about this, since you're the one who found this for us initially.
Not really.
And, I don't expect that people would have been able to read all this stuff. I just got everything to MIS early afternoon today. So, certainly, read through these later and come back. But I just wonder if anyone has any questions now about this report.
I'm sure I'll have questions when I finish reading it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Don.
how many of these referenda were municipalities and how many were counties?
That's a good question. Scroll, there's a good chart in here. Let's see, so there were, oh, they're gonna make this a little, oh no. There were 18 cities, 33 villages, 42 towns, and 15 counties.
Thank you.
And it looks like the pass rate is 35% for all of those. The pass rate for counties was closer to 50%. Towns had the lowest at 21%. Cities had the highest at 61%. Good question. There's a lot to learn in here. I think the biggest misconception I had is I thought there would be a greater partisan predictor. For example, I thought maybe Democratic areas would vote for more referendums and Republican areas would vote against more of them. And that's not true in these years from 06 to 18.
Mr. Chairman, it would be interesting to look at the 50% who passed of the counties, that is, and look at the kind of campaign or the factors involved that contributed to the passage.
Agreed. Yeah, I was kind of curious actually what the list of counties were. They're a little more historic now compared to the next agenda item, but I do think it would be interesting to look at those and what led to passage versus failure. I think, you know, if there was one thing I would suggest reading out of this report, if you don't have a lot of time to be reading this whole thing, it's the case studies from the three cities, from Janesville, South Milwaukee, and there was one more. They were super interesting. They really made it sound like there were some cases where they kind of just didn't know what they were asking the voters, or they felt like they couldn't tell them the purpose or advocate for it. And those they had less luck on. But you know, as we go through this next agenda item, I think we'll get a better feel for what's passing in counties and what's not passing. So let's go ahead and move on to agenda item number 8 then. So Wisconsin counties holding past referendums. So on this one, so for county board members in your folders, there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 examples. So 8 attachments. And then for Aaron and Todd, if he's there, any members of the public, if you go to the packet on the website, these will all be in the packet in the order that we talk about them. So what I did yesterday is I just Googled every county in the state and I just put the word operating referendum after the name of the county. And so in that process, I found the top results in Google just showed that there were 8 counties that were talking about referendums in the past few years. So Ashland County, they had 2 referendums. They both failed. They were, if you look at the articles for Ashland County, I remember they were talking about institutional costs and the state not giving them enough money, things that we talk about. But the tone of the articles was very kind of combative and kind of negative. And I kind of wondered if maybe that was what led to some of the failure, but I don't know. The second example was Dunn County. They were discussing a referendum, but it wasn't placed on the ballot. I think that was a few years ago, back in 18. Forest County, they did a referendum. They were very specific. It was really interesting. It was for 6 new employees at the new 911 dispatch center, and that one passed. Greene County, they did a referendum for a nursing home, and it was placed on the ballot. I couldn't find the results, but Clint, maybe you know what the results were?
I think it passed.
Did it get passed? Yeah, Clint, you just froze up. Okay, he's nodding his head. Okay.
I
Clint,
think it was in that La Follette thing that I had.
was it? Okay.
So it talked about that it passed.
Okay. Okay. The fifth example is Lincoln County. They did a referendum for additional highway spending and that failed. The sixth one was Oneida. They did two questions here. So they did a question for highways, and that failed. And then they did this advisory referendum. And that one was basically asking the voters if they wanted the county board to make cuts to the general budget and allocate that money to highways. And that also failed. And then the seventh example is Portage County. They did a referendum for the nursing home and that passed. And then the last example is going to be on the upcoming November ballot in Washington County. And that was a referendum for public safety. It's being debated right now. And I think they had a lot of issues with, must have been with all the recent violence. I know Black Lives Matter was mentioned in the article, and the need for 25 to 35 new staff in their sheriff's department. So I think it's very tied to current events there. So some mixed results in the past few years, and any thoughts or questions on these?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Green Lake also had one in 2012 for a technical college building, and I believe that passed.
Okay. And was that the county or was that the tech school district, or do you know?
Well, it was Green Lake County did it, but it was for the tech school, and they had quite, I was thinking they had quite the educational thing, but it was Portage County had pages and pages of educational stuff and spent a lot of money on a company to design that for them.
And did you share those with us last time, or those examples, or were there other examples for the education?
I did not. I found those recently.
Okay. Great.
Mr.
Maybe
Chair.
if you could just send those my way, and then we'll get that on the next agenda.
Yep, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Did we reach out to WCA to see if they have accumulated any information or have any insight on the county level of referendums?
I have not. Has anyone else done that? Okay, good idea. Got that written down. Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well, we'll just keep marching along here, and then
Okay, this is
back to that
Bob.
one.
Hey,
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So just looking at this, it really, where there's specifics, looks like there's more success. Where there's a need specified, that really makes a big difference. And I'm looking at the 911 center, I'm looking at the nursing homes, I'm looking at some of those. I don't know how we incorporate that, because that's, I mean, I get the point. If it's specific, people see the need. If it's general, then I think we need to be really careful what specific we do and how we make it specific.
Yep, thanks for that, Bob. Okay, let's move on to number 9, county budget services overview. So lately at the finance and personnel committee of the county, we've been, obviously talking a lot about the budget. We got some new information from the clerk, and we've gotten a lot of information gathered by the administrator as well. So what I did is I pulled ideas from both the clerk and the administrator, and I started just cracking the budget in some different ways yesterday, and I pulled together a report. So Clint, I'm wondering if you can just open let's see, it's the 09 budget. I'm sorry, 09A budget overview PDF, and share your screen. Oh, and I see Clint just said in the chat window that he has reached out to WCA. They don't have a lot of information outside the legalities of how to conduct a referendum. They have advised that we reach out to fellow counties that have conducted one. Okay, they're going to let us do the work, which is okay. We can figure that out. But it would be nice if the counties association maybe did a little something on referenda. So Clint is working on pulling up that document right now. He has a little lag in his presentation. Let me just see. I don't know if there's a way I can share my screen. Well, maybe I can share my screen. Oh, no, looks like he's got it. Great. Okay. So I'm just trying to crack the budget in different ways to illustrate the counties, what's going on, because there's sometimes a lot of information. So just stop me if any of this doesn't make sense, and just feel free to criticize it at any time or ask questions. So overall, we have, in the current budget year, we have adopted a budget with $36 million in expenses. And then in the lower area, we have also, of course, $36 million in revenues. And in orange, that's all other revenues besides property tax. And in blue, that's our property tax levy. So it's $10.5 million for our levy. So if you go to the next slide, I think the question why we're here in this committee is we're looking at why would we increase the property tax levy on the second page. So for county board members or anyone following on the website, I'm on page 2 where it has a red circle and it says why increase this. So the third, yeah, maybe I will try to share my screen. I don't know if I can do that. Looks like Clint's having some trouble.
I'm hung up at the orange. Are we below that?
We are. Give me just a minute here.
I'm looking for the page number.
I'm sorry, I did not put page numbers on there. I should have. It should be page 3. It should be on page 3 out of 21.
Serious offense.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna do my best to describe it without a visual, and then hopefully Clint can catch up with me. So there's a slide that shows the history of county wage and benefit changes. So it's kind of a busy slide, but this is from our Health and Human Services Department. They compiled all the wage and benefits changes over the past 10 years or so. And you can see in red all the years where we didn't have wage increases. Some of those years we didn't have wage increases, especially 2016, there was a $1,000 bonus given. And we also gave a raise in 2022, which is not on this chart, and that was 7%. So it looks like at about, if you count the bonus year, about half of the past 10 years, we've given our employees wage increases. And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that we haven't been able to give predictable wage increases. And we're hearing from most employees, not all employees, but most of them, that wages have been a concern since Act 10, since we haven't given regular wage increases in the early 2010s. So on the next slide, this shows the number of employees that we've got at the county by department. So Pine Valley, we have the most employees at 85, and then Health and Human Services 75, followed by the sheriff at 33 and highway at 30. Every other department has 8 or fewer employees, and most departments, the majority, have either 2 or 3 employees in them. So pretty small departments. So if you start breaking out that 36 million in expenses on the next slide, there's a pie chart, and in really big blue, our biggest expenses are in Pine Valley, and second biggest are in Health and Human Services, and then they're followed by highway and sheriff. And then if you go to the next pie chart, these are our revenues, and these are where our revenues come from. So most of our revenues come from property tax. The second most is from Pine Valley Community Village for all the fees they charge to Medicare, Medicaid, and private pay. And then Health and Human Services brings in a lot of revenue as well. And so this next chart, which shows it's a column graph, and this shows orange, and orange are expenses, and green, and those are revenues. And this shows it by department. And this is sorted by the most to the least impact to the property tax levy. So it's another way of looking at those two pie charts. Health and Human Services, yes, they have a lot of expenses, and so does Pine Valley, but they bring in a lot of revenue. Whereas the Sheriff's Department have much fewer expenses, but their revenue is very little. Highway is another one that has more expenses than the Sheriff's Department, but they bring in quite a bit of revenue, mostly because of their work on state highways. So you can see this organized by departments all the way across the county operation. On the next chart, we're really here because of that property tax levy, even though we have to be aware of those other revenue sources and how they affect things. But this just looks at the property tax levy. How do we get to that $10.5 million figure? And this is, again, organized by most to least impact to the property tax levy. So the Sheriff's Department, they take the biggest piece, followed by Health and Human Services, followed by debt service, so all our debt, and that does not include Pine Valley, followed by highway. And then the fifth most is Pine Valley Community Village. And then there's a few things at the end in green. Those offset the property tax levy, sales tax, state shared revenue. And then on the next chart, because column graphs are a little harder for me to read, although they kind of help, but this is a pie chart that shows what we just looked at, but it takes out those green, it takes out the revenues from sales tax and state shared revenue, because you can't show that in a pie chart.
Oh, that's not my ceiling fan.
Or at least I don't know how to. So you can see here how our biggest four pieces of the property tax levy come from sheriff, HHS, debt service, not including Pine Valley, and then highway. And then Pine Valley is fifth. And then all the smaller departments are after that. So this next slide just shows that pie chart, but it lists out all the dollar amounts for every department. I only included it because I pulled out a few departments because the pie chart there were too many labels and they were laying on top of each other. So I just wanted everyone to be able to see all the departments and what their impact is to the property tax levy this year. And then the next slide, this is another column graph. And so Clint had this in his report to the Finance Committee back in June. I just kind of overlapped a couple of his charts, so it'd be a little easier to show what's been happening with property taxes in Richland County since 2014. And again, these are just for the county. They're not for the school districts, the cities, the villages, or the towns, just the county's portion of the property tax bill. So you can see the operating levy in blue, that's fairly flat. That's because the state won't allow us to raise it above the level of net new construction in the county. And then in orange, that shows the debt. And you can see there's two big jumps in the debt. So if you go to the next slide, I just put arrows where those big jumps are in the debt. So it's between 2017 and 18, and then between 2020 and 2021. And so why did our taxes increase in those years by a level so much greater? It's because in 2017 and 18, on the next slide, we built Pine Valley Community Village. It's a beautiful new facility for the seniors in our community. Obviously, that costs some money. And then on the next slide, in between 2020 and 21, we started borrowing to catch up with a lot of these maintenance needs at the county that just weren't happening before. So the biggest chunk by far of that increase that year went to highways. And you can see in that chart on the right-hand side, almost half of county highways need significant rehabilitation. Those are the pavement ratings. So red is bad, green is good. So we've been doing a lot more work there in the last 3 years, or the last two-ish years, thanks to that property tax increase. Another big chunk of the pie was the new ambulance building. It's not new. It's a remodel of Richland Electric Cooperative. So they will be moving out of the courthouse basement and going over there. And that was a $600,000 piece of the pie. And then I think the next biggest expense, and we haven't broken these out, this is just kind of my impression of those two debt notes that we took out between those 2 years, was patrol cars. So now we have a regular program to replace our patrol cars for all of our road patrol deputies who are patrolling the county around the clock 7 days a week. So it takes about 2 cars a year to keep up with all the travel they do. So on the next slide, there's just a little context, things that people are probably hearing about the county in the news or just kind of chitter chatter on the street. You can see our credit rating, also known as the Moody's rating, because they're the ones who do the credit rating. It was at A1, which was, I don't think it's the best, but I think it's a pretty good rating. I can't quite remember what the best is. And you can see in 2016, we got downgraded. In 2018, we got downgraded again. And then just a few months ago, we got upgraded. And the big reason for the downgrades and the upgrades, you can see on the next slide, and that's how much money did we have in the bank. And what was happening in 15 and 16 is we were in danger of not being able to pay our bills if we didn't make some big changes. And so county boards previous to us, and some of you were on the county board back then, made a lot of changes to turn that around. And since then, we're actually in a better financial situation than we were 11 years ago when you just look at our bank account balance. So now we have 3 months worth of expenses in our bank account. We can cover emergencies now. And then another big trend, this was again from that report. A lot of these things, the last few slides and this one, were from that report from Clint in June. Our sales tax revenues have been going up. We have the 0.5% sales tax, and that's gone up about $400,000 or so. So that's an additional source of revenue. But then on the flip side, the next slide, this is our state shared revenue. And in green, that's what we're actually receiving from the state, and it's dropping. And then in green, that's what it would have been if inflation factors had been followed. So, what we're losing, 700 grand or so from the state, if you compare it to inflation.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah.
should those descriptions be reversed, or am I not reading this right?
We have received, let's see, actual state shared revenues is in red. Inflation adjusted state shared revenue is green. So what we've received is in red, and what we would have received if the state would have kept up with inflation is in green.
Oh, okay. So in other words, green is if they had tracked with inflation, that's what it would have been. And so did you come up with the inflation numbers, or who did that?
It comes from the consumer price index. So when the county board passed that resolution in June, I had researched that and presented a chart along with it back at the finance committee before finance passed it to the county board. And I've got all the data to back that up. Happy to send that out and share that with anyone.
Okay, I think the description on that chart probably could be improved so it's more clear.
John,
Yeah.
another question?
Good. No, good point.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
would the state legislature, the Wisconsin Counties Association, have this? Or is this something that you came up with?
I pulled this down from someone from the Dale Knapp from the Wisconsin Counties Association, the one who does all the forward analytics stuff. He helped me get that data. He taught me how to go to the Department of Revenue website for the state of Wisconsin and pull down state shared revenue.
And so then you made this chart.
So I made the chart using Wisconsin Department of Revenue data.
I would encourage you to send that to Senator Howard Markline.
Well, it did go to him because we passed this in June and we buried it in the resolution.
Nice.
And we asked that it be sent to him and then our 3 assembly representatives, the governor, and the Wisconsin Counties Association. But we also might want to take it to the Joint Finance Committee when they start working on the next budget.
Sure. But it's just a local issue, though.
Mr. Chair.
Well, we'll correct that. Yeah.
Sean?
Was that Dave? Go ahead.
And the green numbers you're tracking here, that's figuring in just inflation, right? No other increases in any kind of state aid.
No, so there are other state aids as well. And I did not analyze those.
But for the shared revenue, you're not assuming any other kind of increase. You're just factoring in inflationary factors.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and this is only the category of state shared revenue. There are other state aids like I think of carry and snowmobile aids. That's another state aid that comes in through fees that snowmobile or registration fees, I believe, that snowmobilers pay. So we get all sorts of aids from the state, but this is that general category where they are meant to share income taxes and state sales tax back with the places where people live. That's originally why this was all put into place back in the early 1900s.
Sean?
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, Steve here. As we develop tools for education and explanation, another good chart would be the one that shows the percent of our revenues that is from state aid, and how it's declined in the last several years.
That would be a good one. I agree.
Sean,
And I think we can come up with that historical data from the Department of Revenue. I think they'll have our total expenses all the way back to 2001. So that's a good idea.
Sean, this is Bob.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the wheel tax on here, when that started or what effect that had. I think that might be a useful piece. I'm not sure when that started. I think that would be doesn't Richland County have a wheel tax now?
Yeah, I think that was like.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good idea. $300,000 a year, and we've been collecting that for a few years. We restarted our seal coating program thanks to that.
It's been about around 3 or so years.
Mm-hmm. Good points. We'll get that added in there. Any other thoughts on all this budget overview?
An excellent. Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
This is an excellent presentation.
Thanks. Well, it's taken a lot of ideas from other people, so I really appreciate all the work others have done to get us to this point.
I'm sure we all appreciate what you've done here.
Well, and somehow, I don't know how, I'm thinking we've got to figure out how to simply explain the budget to the public. And, I don't think we could do it in 20 charts. I think it's too much. But I went ahead and included all this because they were things that seemed to me to be kind of interesting factors. So if people have opinions about certain things that they think should really be used or not used, or things that spoke well to you or others that didn't, we want to talk about that at this committee too.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of detail here, but I think that this type of presentation with the detail would fit very well if you say you had a meeting with all the town chairs to educate them and enhance their understanding. They could help us a good deal knowing the details.
Sure. Yeah. And I think one of those counties, they actually sent a letter to the town chairs. It's in one of the attachments. I can't remember which county it was. I think it actually failed in their county, but they were trying to get the highway department more, better funded through the operational levy.
I think
And
it'd be
they,
good to have an education meeting with them and
sure,
get them on board.
I also
yeah,
think,
good idea. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I also think that maybe Sylvan and Bloom Township chairmen should be in on that conversation as well. But I would also encourage you to go to the County Towns Association. They have one where I think where all the town chair people.
Do you know when they hold that, Carrie? Is that an annual thing? And do you know
I
what
think
month?
it's monthly,
Oh,
quarterly.
monthly?
Monthly or quarterly.
Does anyone know? Okay, well, we'll look into that then. And of course, for those who aren't on the inside, Bloom and Sylvan are my townships that I represent. So
But they're also the biggest critics of the county. Those two.
absolutely.
That's
I know.
why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Go ahead,
Uh,
Dave.
It's a pretty extensive data analysis here, but one factor I didn't see addressed would be operational tax levy versus debt service tax levy. And just explaining to folks, it's the operational segment of that we're really feeling the pinch in.
Yeah.
Even though you can show the chart where, yeah, the debt levy has grown, we're also not necessarily bumping up against limits on that. It's the operations one that we're running up hard against here.
Yeah, so just highlighting that more
Yeah.
in any presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
very good point. You know, for example, the wage question is a big operational challenge.
Yes. And that actually is probably a really good transition to the next agenda item. So let's go ahead and jump to that. That's agenda item number 10, the 5-year financial planning worksheet. So this is the document that finance has been reviewing and making amendments to, and it's still in committee. It hasn't gotten out of committee yet, I guess you'd say. And so on this one, what I did this morning is I just, the financial planning worksheet is like 17 pages long. And so, you know, Aaron, I was thinking of you. You're not part of the county operation, but even for us on the county board, how can we kind of simplify it a little bit just to understand what are the changes that are being proposed right now and where does that leave us? And these are not final numbers, these are in flux. And I just am trying, I wanted to make sure this committee was updated on what the Finance and Personnel Committee is up to right now and where we're kind of headed. So the way, and this is as of the last meeting, although there were some changes made at the last meeting that weren't yet incorporated into the worksheet. So I can point those out if anyone's wondering, but I'm basically giving you a summary of the financial planning worksheet, the 5-year financial planning worksheet as of the last finance meeting, which was last week. So we have wage increases in there for Pine Valley staff that are annual now. And you can see the percents there. They go from 3.5% to 1.5%. Then we have wage increases for all other staff. Similarly, those are annual and they go from 4.5% down to 1.5%. Then we've got the health insurance increases. Now, of course, we don't know actually what those are until a little bit later each year, but these are estimates based on past history, going from 15 to 7% annually. We've also got below the health insurance increases, we've got figured in there that in the coming years, we would no longer be using our general fund balance, so excess money in our checking account. We wouldn't be using contingency fund balance because we emptied that this current year, and we wouldn't be using Pine Valley profits. And these are all assumptions. I'm not saying this is where the budget's going to end up. I'm just telling you what's in the 5-year financial planning worksheet right now. And Clint, correct me if I get any of this wrong, because you know that worksheet a lot better than I do. We would figure out what the increase is each year for the operating levy based on net new construction. So you can see the figures there. We would add one FTE patrol deputy in the sheriff's office due to a federal grant. That would be $100,000 by the year 2027 because the grant fades away. We have an increase in the tower rental fees for the new emergency communication system, aka the radio towers, and that would be $110,000 by 2027. We've got a half FTE in child support. We've got the reduction of one full-time position between the zoning and land conservation departments beginning in 24. So that's a savings of 60 grand. We've got the addition in 2027 of a full-time county maintenance director to cover all the buildings of the county. That'd be almost 100 grand. We've got the addition of a full-time equivalent radio tower coordinator. That would be in 2024. That's 80 grand. We've got continuation of a half-time position at MIS. Once ARPA funding runs out for that, it's 25 grand. We've got various IT upgrades of 140 grand by 2027, and the addition of a full-time finance officer by 2027, also of 100 grand. Got the addition of a full-time HR coordinator by 2027, 89 grand. We've got a new electronic accounting system in 2027, that's 300 grand. We've got the creation of a contingency fund in 2026, that would be 100 grand. And then we get into our reductions. So a reduction to the UW extension budget beginning in 2024, that's a savings of 86 grand. Reduction in the fair budget beginning also that year, savings of 15 grand. Simons, 2024, savings of 36 grand. UW Richland budget, eliminating that beginning in 2025, that's a savings of 40 grand. The economic development budget, eliminating that, that's a savings of 74 grand. And then finally, for all the big departments, they're grouped together by standing committee. We have reductions to the HHS and veterans departments beginning in 24, that's 350 grand. The sheriff's, clerk of court, register and probate, DA, emergency management departments, all those 350 grand. Highway, courthouse maintenance, and MIS beginning in 24, that's 350 grand. And then in the administrator, clerk, and treasurer departments beginning also that year, a savings of 200 grand. And we still have budget gaps that have not been determined using all those assumptions. There are some more minor things worked into that worksheet. I'm just pulling out the big things, especially the ones that have been talked about or the bigger ticket items. We still have gaps to deal with that the finance committee has not yet resolved, which will need to be resolved, in my opinion, of $1 million in 2025, 2.7 million in 2026, and 2.6 million in 2027. So that's a summary, and I'm sure you've got lots of questions or things to say about that. Or I'm wrong, and it's so overwhelming that.
Well, Sean, I'll say something. This
Okay.
is Steve. Yes, we need to get our hands around our financial situation, but at the end of the day, we need something that is easily communicated, it solves our problem in some way or another. It needs to be simple enough, but effective enough. And so our challenge is going to be figuring out which chunk or which angle to take this. And so I feel like we need to spend some time on that question too, now that we've seen all this.
Yep, good point. Thank you.
I have a few questions as well, Sean. Could you share
Yeah, go ahead.
screen?
Go ahead.
Could you share your screen again, please? And pardon me, I just want some clarity, I guess, just to understand some of
Absolutely.
the stuff. I know this isn't really problem solving as far as questions I'm going to ask, but just for my information, just scroll it all the way to the top, please. That's good right there. Go down a little bit. the wage increases in 2023 across the board are all high and it steps down through the years. Is that because wages are behind currently?
Yeah.
That's the sense, although I don't, in my opinion, we have not gotten very clear information about where our wages are compared to other counties. We have seen Cheryl's produced for us the wage scale, so it shows step 1 through step 8. What are various positions getting? Whether it's a road patrolman or a CNA. We've seen those comparisons with other counties, but we don't necessarily know where our employees are at on the wage scale versus where they're at in Vernon County or some of our Grant County, are their peer counties. So I think we need a little more information on that is my personal opinion.
Yeah, Sean, maybe just a quick explanation on the Carlson Detman basis and why we think we're behind.
We hired a consultant, Carlson Detman, to do a study of our wages compared to other counties back in 2018. They found that we were below the average. I asked them, I followed up a couple weeks ago to ask them what were the comparables they used. And they sent me the list of counties, and they also used cities, and they used some national data as well. So they put quite a bit in that. And so I think that's why there's personally why I've been interested in seeing just a little more detail about what our peer counties doing, instead of this kind of hard to pin down how they did their comparison. So
I would agree. I mean, these positions in a city are gonna pay a heck of a lot more than it's like
Mr. Chairman?
no different than a teacher. A teacher in a city is paid more than a teacher in a rural school district. But I have two more questions.
And let me just answer that. I don't want things to get misconstrued too much by what I said. Like, for example, they looked at the city of Platteville. That was one of them that jumps out to me. They compare our wages to their wages. They weren't necessarily comparing them to, like, say, the city of Madison or the city of Milwaukee. And we can look at that list, and I can get that to folks so we can make sure it's clear. But go ahead.
The health insurance one, that one to me is really interesting because it shows decreases year over year. Additionally, health insurance increases year over year. I guess I'm just curious where that information is coming from.
I can speak to that one, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yep. So we're anticipating 15% based on a medical loss ratio from previous years, but then we also don't know where we're going to fall just on the inflationary impacts on health insurance. It's an optimistic look and hoping that two things happen. One, that our medical loss ratio improves, inflationary impacts on the healthcare field kind of also come down. I'm trying to visualize that there's like a bubble of delayed services during the pandemic, and hopefully some of those costs increase. The other factors may be that the county might have to.
Clint, you just cut out on us.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can hear you.
I'm sorry. So it's based on a couple different things of hoping that the medical inflationary facts post-pandemic stabilize and that comes down. It's based on hoping that our medical loss ratio also improves. And then some of the impacts might be future considerations for finance and personnel and the board to say this is kind of the amounts that we think we can increase from a employer perspective. And if we can't go beyond that, it might have to be employee to start or to adjust our premium shares to try to keep our numbers down. Otherwise, our inflationary factors and our gaps only grow larger. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I just have one more question.
Go ahead.
Just
Go ahead.
scroll down just a little bit, please, Sean. Stop. So the FTEs, are these fully burdened numbers? Meaning, does this benefits, wages, everything, or is this just salaries?
I'll let Clint answer that again. I think they're fully burdened, but I'm not 100% sure.
That is correct. Estimated fringe benefits with it.
That's all I got.
Okay, who's next?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
It's very informative for us to have that, but let's not get too buried in it because it's not the charge of this committee to solve that problem. That's finance and personnel's issue. We've been charged with developing a referendum, which does mean we have to understand this. So it's good for us to have that. But as far as trying to figure out the solution to it, our part is to figure out, okay, how could a referendum meet the needs that we're projecting?
Yes, yeah, really good point. And what portion of the needs do we think we could meet through a referendum? We're part of our task is to figure out what do we think we can go to the voters with. So if finance and personnel says, we've got a gap of 2.5 million, and this committee says, that's too high, then we can make that recommendation if we choose to. Bob, you got something?
Yeah, I'm just trying to formulate my question. So my question is, can we gather what percentage? What does 1% mean? If we do a 1% levy increase, what does that mean? What is 2%? Some of the examples I saw out there for referendum were 4.5%. What does that mean in a dollar figure for us? So we have an idea what that means to put that out as a referendum question.
Yeah, good question. And I think we can pretty easily come up with those.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question. What's our current equalized value? What's our current levy rate? I mean, I could go back and look for it, but we need to have that in front of us. And then, like Bob says, just pencil out some ideas on what percentage gets us what.
Is some very ballpark and that haven't been calculated or ran through our municipal advisor yet. Some of the numbers are, we're working with a $10.4 million levy. So if you're increasing it by
we lost you again, Clint. My mind was going to the operating side of our levy, which is 6.6 million. So I don't know if in those other examples they were using their total property tax levy or just the operating side of it. So that's I think another question I have is how do we which portion of it do we use, or do we use all of it when we're doing that percent increase? Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Are you all hearing me okay?
Yeah, we can't hear Clint, but we can hear you fine.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Good.
Yes.
Now we can.
I apologize. From when we're doing our short-term borrowing, we know that about $1 million impact ends up being for a millage increase or a rate increase is about just under $100 on $100,000 of property value.
And Bob, your question was more about increase to the total levy, but I assume that could also be translated in the way that Clint was talking about it as what would the percent impact be on $100,000 home, or what would the dollar amount be on $100,000 home?
So I guess yes, and also some of the referendums we saw were a 4.5% levy increase. So if we're looking at 10.4 levy right now, and we were asking for $1 million, that's 10%.
Yeah.
So what is that percentage that we're looking at? That I think that's going to be how the referendum is written is going to be important to know what that means.
Okay, thanks for that, Bob. Anyone else?
Well, yes, Mr. Chairman, it's 10% of the existing levy, but it's a much smaller percentage of the total county budget.
I totally agree. I think that's what we need to make sure that we clarify what that means. Because if you look at the total county budget of 30
36 million.
36 million, I think it was something like that. So yes, and that percentage looks much smaller, and it's that kind of information we need to know to make sure that we're looking at it accurately and correctly and getting that information out that way, because that would make it only 4 point something odd percent, which is real similar to what the other referendums had been.
I'm looking at attachment 08F. That was Oneida County, and they had a notice of referendum, so we can see the legal language they used. And they talk in question 1 about how for the next fiscal year they're limited to increasing their tax 0.8%, which results in a levy of 14.8 million. So what I want to know is that was that 14.8 million, did it include their debt levy or did it not? Because that's going to change. That could be a potentially big gap for us because our debt levy makes up 30% of our property taxes. So,
Yeah, correct.
okay. Anyone else? All right. So thanks for sitting through that and having a lot of questions and good feedback on this, all that information. So now we're kind of shifting to the part of the agenda where we've got some potential action items for the committee. So I'm thinking back, some of you will remember that when we studied the idea of having an administrator for the county, we also had an ad hoc committee. And Supervisor Luck, she chaired that committee. And in the end, what the committee decided to do was to write a report and then issue that report. I can't remember if it went right to the county board or if it went to finance and personnel, but it was a report with a bunch of findings and an overall recommendation about how administration at the county should be handled. So I'm kind of thinking along the lines this time of doing something similar coming from this committee and having it go to the finance and personnel committee, because that's what resolution 22-74 says we have to do. We have to make a recommendation to the finance and personnel committee regarding an operating levy referendum. So what I did is I went through my notes from the last meeting, things that people said, and I also went through the resolution just to try to capture some of the tasks that the county board has given us. And I drafted an outline here of how the report could be laid out. This is definitely a draft. I'm very open to changes to it. I also don't know that just because we adopt a draft outline that it's going to be what we're going to end up with in the end. But I think we kind of need something to start with so we know kind of what we're filling. You know, what information are we trying to gather, because we have to get toward a finalized recommendation here. So I've got it listed out in, I guess, what you might call like 5 major chapters or parts, or I don't know what you want to call it, those big black bullets on the left-hand side, having an executive summary, and then having something that goes into the purpose for the referendum. And then the third one would be the education of the electorate. The fourth one, a summary of the county's budget and services provided. And then a fifth one, almost maybe like an addendum or an appendix about operating referendums in other Wisconsin counties. And then within each of those 5, at least the last 4, the middle 3, I've got some more detail. And so I tried to take some of the points that were made in the last committee meeting and get them put in here. So I'm wondering if folks have any feedback on the idea of doing a report, and then assuming you're supportive of that, then the detail for the outline.
So this is Bob, definitely in favor of the report, and in looking this over, it's the topics I had of interest are covered. So everything I had thought of is summarized here.
So Sean, under the second bullet, the first sub bullet, that is in essence the referendum question.
Yes, that would be the exact text.
Okay.
That's right.
Sean, this is Dave.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
And I think what I'm concerned about is captured here. I'm just not sure if it's correctly emphasized, our charge is to come up with recommendations on a referendum and also recommendations for action if the referendum fails. There is a bullet here that says consequences of a referendum passing versus failing, but it doesn't necessarily encompass recommendations for a failed referendum, which is part of our charge.
Yeah, got it. And I almost have to go back to the language from the last county board meeting when we adopted that resolution. Was there something, do you remember the exact language, Dave?
I think it's in last meeting's folder. I can just jump back to it here.
Okay, thank you.
Thought it was, maybe it wasn't.
I think I found it in the minutes for the last county board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, it does say the fifth. Oh, and there, Clint's got it up too. He's pulling it for us.
Yep.
The fifth one: make a recommendation on outcomes of a failed referendum. So I think what you're suggesting is that bullet point or that sub bullet point. Get more into the outcomes, or maybe use that language.
And maybe purpose of referendum is our committee's recommendation on the referendum, and then it's followed by a same level bullet of recommendations if referendum fails.
Got it.
Sean, Steve here.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah. On your last bullet, where it's operating referendum, maybe a more general bullet of just reference sources of information we sourced to justify the report, of which those other referendums would just be one item.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Any other ideas about how to change the outline here? Okay, so I've heard two ideas. I'm just going to summarize those. So under purpose of referendum, the main second bullet, the fifth sub bullet, the last one, it says consequences of the referendum passing versus failing. What we would do there is probably just change the language and talk about recommendations if a referendum fails, and make that its own chapter or section of the report. So now we would have 6 main bullets instead of 5. So that's the first change. And then the second change would be the last bullet, currently the 5th one, but it will be the 6th one. Here we would be striking the words operating referendums in other Wisconsin counties and rename that to references that were sourced during our committee's work.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, Dave, did I get yours right too?
Yes.
Okay, and does anyone have any additional ideas? Okay, so then I'd be looking for a motion to adopt the referendum ad hoc committee report outline for further development with the 2 changes that I read aloud.
I'll make that motion.
Bob will second.
Okay, so a motion by Turk and a second by Frank. Any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Don.
May I add, we were talking about making recommendations in the event that the referendum would fail. I don't think we should ignore the notion of consequences because, for example, wages would be very difficult to manage under consequences, as well as other very consequential events. And so somehow, in making recommendations, we have to have some recognition of consequences in conjunction with those recommendations, I would think. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about consequences within the current language of recommendations, because obviously recommendations are going to have to take into account what consequences would happen if it failed. So, yeah, we can flesh that out in the report. I think without changing the language would be my opinion. So. And you can hold us to account on that. So. Okay, any other discussion? All right, let's go ahead and do a roll call on this one. So Ms. Dole, if you could take the roll, that'd be great.
What are we doing?
We're just voting. So if you were in favor of the motion to adopt the report outline as we detailed, you'd vote aye. If you're not in favor of it, you'd vote no.
Kirk,
Aye.
Frank,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Umbehound, Murphy Lopez,
Aye.
Severson,
Aye.
all voting aye.
Okay, so that motion passes. Thanks everyone for that. And then let's go to agenda item number 12, which is public education. We know, I know a lot of the sentiment expressed at the last meeting was, we really got to start public education from the beginning. We can't wait too long on that one. So what I did is I developed, gotta find the document myself, and I'm sure Clint's looking for it too to share with you on the screen. I just developed a very brief outline of things we could do. Again, I would certainly welcome amendments or changes to this. So I was thinking of it in three main categories, just based on how I know people are communicating with each other in Richland County, in my experience. So I've got radio, newspaper, and social media on the list here. And the idea, these are just initial ideas. It's just to get the conversation started here. So the idea on the radio would be to request a morning show segment in late August or early September with Ron Fruit and develop an outline of talking points to bring back to the next committee meeting for committee approval. And then the second one, newspapers. And we've got 4 newspapers that I understand have a reading audience in Richland County, led by the Observer. And then the Viola Epitaph is actually in Richland County. The Valley Sentinel's in Spring Green, but they seem to be covering especially the southeast corner of the county more. And then Lafarge, that's probably the least impact to us, but they cover the northwest section of the county, so the area that myself and Steve Carroll represent. So there I'm thinking we could draft a letter from the committee to be published in late August or early September to be approved at the next committee meeting. So bringing a letter and then having us look over it, making sure the committee's good with it, and then sending it out to those papers.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Don, go ahead.
Lots of people read the Boscombe Dial, and that has a lot of coverage.
Oh,
southern part of the county.
Thank you. What about the Muscadet Progressive? I forgot about that one too.
Yes, both are very good possibilities.
Are there any others I'm missing?
Newspaper wise, I'm not thinking any, but I'm thinking any of the township board meetings, any of the city council meetings. We have Viola, there's Lone Rock, Richland Center. All the town boards have their monthly meetings. I think most of them are all monthly. I think having that bullet point list, like you said, and breaking up and getting to those meetings, letting them know would be very important too.
Mr. Chair, it's Kerry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go along with Bob. I was just waiting for my turn, but to go along with Supervisor Frank's what he just talked about there, I would encourage I guess a couple forums. The county holds a couple forums where the public can go to. We would have information, bullet points, and we would have graphs and whatever handouts so people know they can ask us questions, we can respond back. And then to go along with what Bob's saying, I would call it outreach, that we should go out and do some outreach. So we would go to those townships meetings, and we would go to the Rotary clubs and the Lions clubs and fire departments and talk to them so they know, like, this is what's going on. You're hearing it right from the county itself, not from a friend whose uncle attended our forum and told them something that he didn't quite understand. You've got to do much of that as possible.
Yep, those are really good ideas. So I think what I'm hearing so far here, and I didn't get to my third one, but I'm adding a fourth and a fifth one based on what y'all are saying so far, is that going to other elected bodies. So I heard town board, city council, and then village boards. I'm assuming maybe school districts too, although I'm not sure. So school boards.
Or Sean, really just any organization where you think you can, like forums, scheduled forums, but also any organization where you think it might fit with something they'd want to do and where you think you could get some people to come to, just about anything.
Yeah, and then well, so maybe the fourth cat, and I know I am trying to pin us down on the actual places we would go, because we're just gonna have to figure out, eventually we're gonna have to get to the who would be going to these and doing this. And so I don't want it to be too broad and not be able to well, I guess I don't really care if it's too broad. We'll just need to populate who's going to do it and how much we can chew off, of course. So the fourth category I'm hearing like other elected bodies. The fifth category I'm hearing is like more community groups. Like when Carrie was saying, like the Rotary Club and the fire department. And then maybe a sixth category might be forums that we would specially hold.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Don.
there are, some pretty well organized stakeholders in the community, depending on what their interest is, whether it's in the campus or Pine Valley or whatever. And I'm sure they will want to be participating or involved in one way or another, probably be campaigning.
I'll consider.
Yeah, so I know both of those have foundations. So yeah, that makes sense under like a community group's umbrella, perhaps. Carrie, go ahead.
I was just saying that would fall under like the outreach that we're doing underneath the community or service organizations or whatever group there is out there.
Okay.
I call it outreach.
Friends of the park.
Yeah. Okay, all good ideas. And then the category I didn't verbally say, but that's on the list, is social media. I know that Mayor Coppernall was really a big advocate of like doing a video, and because he does quite a few of those and gets a lot of really good interaction with the public that way. So there, I was thinking we could draft an outline of a video regarding the work of the committee and how we will develop a referendum question for voters. And I guess one thing I'm kind of wondering is, we're gonna have to come up with public education recommendations within the report for what's going to happen after we submit our report, and if the county board goes forward with adopting a resolution to hold an operating referendum. That will be a different phase of public education. I think what I'm wondering in the immediate term in getting ready for our next meeting is what do we need to get out to the community now about the work of this committee and how we're going to develop a recommendation. And are folks thinking we go to all these groups that we just listed out and have forums right now, to develop our work, or were any of those things we're thinking after the county board adopts the resolution when we're in that phase in the 2-3 months leading up to the referendum?
I was thinking afterwards, after we've finalized whether we're going to referendum or not going to referendum. And then if the county board chooses that we're going to referendum, that's when we start hammering public education.
Got it. What were others thinking?
I think some of this, Mr. Chair, we could start on right away, like the social media and the videos. You mentioned the idea of talking about the committee and the work we're doing. Supervisor Severson brought up at our last meeting a prime question that we could start answering right now. How did we get to this point? Why is this important now? Those are two prime topics right there we could start on right away and be able to explain to people. They could also be incorporated into, the other media outreach you've talked about here happening now, whether it's being on WRCO or putting stuff in local papers. But, those are prime topics for creating a video on. And we could certainly come up with some talking points. I would offer my assistance in creation and development of it because I can do that kind of work. So.
Great. And I guess as far as the 3 bullet points that are listed out here for the radio, the newspapers, and social media, is anyone in support or opposed of that group of 3 being the group of 3 that we use to educate the public about the work of this committee before we make a recommendation?
Can you repeat that question?
And maybe I'll narrow it a little bit. Is anyone opposed to going to the radio, the newspapers, and social media within the next month to explain the work of this committee?
I'm not opposed, but I think like Dave was saying, part of that should also be the reason we are where we are. What got us to this point? Why are we doing this? Without necessarily saying what our conclusion is going to be, we can right now say why we're in this effort.
Yeah, and are there? Oh, go ahead.
So this is Bob. Definitely not opposed to it. I think we need to have our talking points. We need to have our, what you will, bullet points. We need to have why we're here, what the vision is, so we can start that. That can be expanded, but we've got to have the common talking points. My other question is this outside the bounds of what the county board has assigned us to do? We're here to make recommendations, I think. I like the idea. I think we need to get it out. I just don't want to make sure we're not crossing that line of what they recommended us to do and asked us to do.
Yeah, I'm just reading the resolution right now, Bob. It says that we'd be making a recommendation to finance and personnel, and it lists out the 5 things we'd be doing. Develop the recommendation or the question, work with administration and staff on developing cost estimates, work with administration and staff on developing a public education plan, making a recommendation on the timing of placing the question on the ballot rather, and then making a recommendation on outcomes of a failed referendum. So it does not give us the explicit authority to go out to the public about our work.
Sean, Steve here.
Yeah.
I could argue that part of this outreach and getting the word out is part of us gathering input from the community early on. So I could read it that way.
I'm glad John has the camera on Bob right now. It's making it easy on me.
Again, I think the outreach is critical. I think we should start now. I just want to make sure that we are, and I like the idea. You're right. It is an information gathering point.
Yeah.
To get that feedback. Yeah, that's a good point.
Mr. Chair, perhaps this is something we could bring up to the full board at the next meeting and just indicate that that's what we'd like to do. And if anybody objects, they would have a chance in that forum.
Yeah, certainly. And we can go the informal route or the formal route, whatever you all think is best. So
or
we could
finance, whichever would be the appropriate venue.
Well, the county board authorized this resolution, so I think the county board has the authority to change the resolution. That's what I was going to say about formal. If we want to recommend an amendment, we could get that through the process, although maybe it would have to go to finance and personnel first. It probably would, or we could just informally ask them, at the end of the agenda at the county board meeting. So I'm okay with either way of doing it. I think both ways will get us to where we want to be. So.
I believe our county administrator is our county communications officer or whatever public information person by expectations of his position. So if he has buy into this, that might help as well.
Yes, I do. And we plan on talking with Ron Fruit here in the next week, myself and Chair Brewer. Just to make sure everybody knows, I do have a question out to Corporation Counsel, though, just to understand and make sure that we stay on the right path. It's my understanding in reading through some of the materials, like the South Milwaukee one, some of the school district materials, where they kind of made a point of ensuring that staff and elected officials are not engaging in a political activity. It sounds like in reading through them and my novice interpretation of statute, that, we have to we have to do due diligence to educate the public and understanding what yes means and what no means. But I think there's some type of a gray line there on ensuring that we're not lobbying.
Mr. Chairman.
So Clint, you just cut out. And so
Mr.
the
Chairman.
last word hold on just a second, Don. So the last word you said was lobbying, Clint. Go ahead.
I apologize. Yeah, the bottom line is I have a question out to Corporation Counsel to see if there's just any legal guidance to make sure that when we are educating the public, we're not stepping into a realm of what might be political activity when we're working on behalf of the county on county time or representing the county. So I just want to get clarification for that before we get too far into the road of educating the public.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, go ahead, Don.
Mr. Langert makes a very good point. There are some pretty clear guidelines about indulging in activity. I don't think it applies so much to the administrator of the county because he has different sets of authorities, but it does apply to employees. They have to be very, very careful. And I was quite familiar with this during the time that I was on the regional ADRC board before, when they were there was a big controversy about whether or not ADRC would stay in existence, and the ADRC people across the state had very good legal advice about not indulging in political activity and yet appearing before the Joint Finance Committee and other institutions and providing evidence-based data, but not indulging in political advocacy per se. And so Mr. Langren makes a good point. This especially applies to employees in terms of indulging in political activity. But I think it's a different case for county board supervisors. There's a different set of circumstances there, and I believe also for the administrator, who is the spokesman for the county. That probably should require, as Mr. Langrick suggests, some good legal advice from our corporation counsel.
And I did talk to Mr. Langrick earlier today. He brought this up, and I just asked that he would bring any statutory language to this committee so we could review it. Because what I don't want to have happen is all work of the committee stop because of this. So, obviously we are elected. Government is political, and we have to clearly define what we mean by some of these terms and look for those definitions in statute, and then look for actual prohibitions before we start passing the message around that no one can talk, or no one can be stating positions on the referendum. I mean, I think it's a good idea to keep in mind that we're very early in the process, and we're just looking at developing a referendum question. And if we want to go if we want to make that recommendation to the Finance and Personnel Committee. So I also don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here and act as if employees, can or can't talk about this, or if county board members can or can't talk about this. I mean, obviously, that has to be balanced with other freedom of speech rights and things like that. So we'll just have to look into statutes and see where we end up. So I'm sure we'll have that on the agenda for the next meeting. But to get back on to the topic of this agenda item, which is public education, I think what I've got here is a motion to develop information to educate the public about the work of this committee via radio, newspaper, and social media platforms. So I'm wondering if someone's interested in making that motion so we can start moving forward on some of that work.
This is Bob. I would make that motion.
Okay, motion.
Yeah, that's fine.
Motion by Frank.
I'll second this, Dave.
Okay, second by Turk. So discussion on this motion.
Do you say what the motion was again?
The motion is to develop information to educate the public about the work of the referendum ad hoc committee via radio, newspaper, and social media platforms.
Okay.
So a little more detail behind that. What I've got listed out here is to develop an outline of talking points for a radio segment. Drafting a letter from the committee to be published in late August, early September, similar to the timing for the radio, to be approved at the next committee meeting. And then for social media, drafting an outline of a video to be approved. We'll have to get the mayor to help us with this since he's our video expert at the next meeting regarding the work of the committee and how we will develop a referendum question recommendation for voters. So, Dave, I know you kind of volunteered, which is awesome, to develop talking points. I wonder if it's possible to develop talking points for both the radio and the newspaper and the video, and then just kind of formatting those a little bit differently based on each medium that we would use. So I wonder if it's possible just to develop one set of talking points that could be used in all three, and then we could reformat them.
To clarify, I volunteered to develop the video. But
No.
can certainly assist with creating talking points too.
Oh, you did volunteer for the video? Is that what you said?
Yes, I have the equipment and technical expertise to make those. So
awesome. All right.
You know Dave's former life before, Sean?
No.
Oh, you can't hear when he talks?
Yes. Wait. I'll let you say it. I don't even want to guess.
I'm just talking.
But I would certainly be willing to assist with putting together some talking points too, although I suspect that some pretty good ones are laid out in the materials that our administrator pulled together to get the resolution through the county board.
Sure. Okay. So I think now that I'm hearing, okay, so you're volunteering for the video, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the talking points, they can be used on any of the three. So I think if we just create a list of bulleted talking points for now, we could just have those talking points come back to the committee at the next meeting, and then we can figure out how to get those into the different formats. So maybe if we just focus on that at this point, I think that would be the most helpful. And I think as part of this too, we want to go to the county board and ask for their implicit approval or see if there's any objection to us getting information out about the committee. So I think those are a little more specificity behind how we would develop this between now and the next committee meeting. Does anyone disagree with any of that? Did I get any of that wrong?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Why don't we go ahead and take another roll call vote on this one? So Cheryl, if you could do that again, please.
Frank,
Yes.
Carol,
Aye.
Behind. Murphy Lopez,
Aye.
Severson,
Aye.
Turk,
Aye.
all voting aye.
Okay, so that motion carries. So we'll move forward with that. And that takes us to agenda item number 13, future agenda items. So Mr. Unbeham, do you have any?
Not at this time.
Okay, Mr. Carroll,
No.
Mr. Turk.
No, I think we got our work pretty well laid out for us.
Okay, Mr. Severson.
Maybe some more data be nice and graphs. Seriously, because that's what's going to help us in order to sell anything, or to even just understand why we need to go and to show like how inflation and all that stuff. That was a good one. And then also, I just got a quick comment too. At some point in time, it's an answer. It's an answer to one of the questions that we had earlier.
Sure, go ahead.
Now, okay. So the RC Towns Association, they meet on a quarterly basis, and the next one would be in September. I don't know the date, but it'll be in September. And then Ms. Nix from the Village of Boaz, Jean Nix, she's the chair of the Towns Association.
Got it. Thank you.
And I have to give credit to one of my friends, or not friends, but coworker, Brian McGraw. He's a joint ambulance chair. He's also the town chairman of Eagle Township. He's the one that provided me with that information. So
Excellent. Well, thanks to both of you for getting that to us, because we'll probably be preparing talking points that could be used for that meeting as well. So we can discuss that at the next meeting. So that's a good agenda item. And then Mr. Frank.
Nothing at this time.
Okay. So that takes us to adjournment. So
Mr. Chair.
I do have one more thing, Sean.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I do agree with Carrie. I'm a visual guy myself, and I'm really dangerous in Excel. So if there is data out there and this team needs help putting that data into visual aids, feel free to let me know.
Awesome. That's great. Well, we'll keep the graph factory working then. At first, I thought you were being sarcastic, Carrie, but now I know you were serious. So
I actually agree with them. I'm more of a visual guy over words, so.
yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Don.
may I be permitted to make a comment before on future agenda items?
Sure, go ahead.
I appreciated Mr. Carroll's remark or his question repeated. How did we get here? And I think it's important for us, sort of empirically, to think about stating the problem. You know, people are saying, "Oh, what's the problem?" We need to clearly state the problem, and then come forward with our recommendations, primarily of which is the reason we're bringing this to the public. But when we bring it to the public, we have to clearly state the problem and the recommended, and before we make recommended solutions. Here's the problem now. Here are the possible solutions. We're not here in this committee to recommend solutions. We're recommending a resolution to the board, but at some point, we need to be very clear in stating the problem and then saying, these are the recommended solutions. So I think at our beginning of our next meeting or sometime in our next meeting, we got to think about a clear statement of the problem.
Yes, and I think that'll fit really well in with agenda item number 12, public education, where we come up with talking points. So I agree. It's going to be a challenge to clearly state the problem and not put people to sleep. Probably need some charge to do it. So okay, so that takes us to adjournment. And do we want to meet again in 2 weeks?
I think
Does
that's
that
good.
work for folks? It would be Monday, August 22nd at 6 p.m. So does that work?
Yep.
Worked for me.
Okay. So let's take a motion to adjourn to Monday, August 22nd at 6 p.m. in the county boardroom and via WebEx.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Carol,
Bob, a second.
second by Frank. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, thank you and the committee for allowing me to come and participate in the meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, you're welcome, Don. Thanks for everyone's participation tonight. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next steps.